Over here, up there, I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river. It wasn't a helicopter, it wasn't a balloon, and it was so near.
And it looked what, sort of round, white, luminescent, and silent?
Silent, and it looked dark, like black or grey in the middle, and had white lights, just looked like light bulbs, you know? Just going off, on, off, on, off, on, blink, 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 round the bottom, and on top was a red light.
If you see a little note on walls and bridges, it says, I saw a UFO. And I was just finished doing walls and bridges. I'd mastered it, or done the last tape of it, and I was really just relaxed and feeling good. And it was summer in New York, and I had the window open, and lo and behold, there was this thing just hovering sort of 100 yards away. But I saw it so close, it wasn't in the sky or nothing, you know? And it was like I could have hit it with a brick if I'd thrown a stone at it. I couldn't see the colours because it was dusk. It was a good, clear summer night. You know, the sky was very clear. And round the bottom of it were just ordinary-looking electric light bulbs, blinking off and on alternatively, like on a billboard or something. And on the top of it was a red light. And the thing I noticed was that there was no noise, and I could hear that freeway down below, all the cars going. So I realized, oh, it's not a helicopter, then it must be a balloon. But it was so close to the rooftop that it couldn't be a balloon. So all the rational things I went through, not a helicopter, balloon. Not a balloon, it's too close to the roof, and it's maneuvering too well to be a balloon. So I just watched it, and it was there for about 5 or 10 minutes. It went off down the East River, and there it was, and that's all I've got to say about it.
Well, it was on our rooftop. You know, when you see that picture of the T-shirt that says New York City on it, that's where we lived. That was our balcony. And what had happened was that we were on the balcony, and it turned out that all of a sudden, John was out there after a summer's night, and he's just out there because we faced the East River, and as we were facing the river, you could, he's just having a cigarette smoke, and he's looking out and just relaxing, and it's Friday night, and all of a sudden he says, he sees this bright lights, and he thought, it's got to be from the billboard signs. Now, meanwhile, I'm in the other room looking to put on some clothes because I just ordered pizza, and so it was quite funny, and so he's standing out there, and picture it, on top of that's dark, but he's out there standing nude.
Right.
Out there.
Okay.
There's John standing in the buff. And he realized, he says, wait a minute, we don't live in an area where there's, billboard signs. So he turned his head, and he saw this thing. And he's yelling for me, and now I'm sitting in the other room going, yeah, okay, fine, I'm not paying attention. And he yells, and he goes, now. And now I come running out, and now we have 2 people who are in the buff standing out, and I'm going, what is that? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And he goes, look, and I said, oh my God. And I realized it's a UFO, and I'm going, and he goes, you're seeing what I'm seeing. I said, and I'm screaming, oh my God, it's a UFO. And there's nobody, not my neighbor who has a staircase that, that they could have come up and said, is this anything wrong? And I'm screaming, and there are not one apartment is lit up anywhere around us. And I realized afterwards, and I watched this thing for about a good solid 10 to 15 minutes. It was slow moving, and it was not that far above my head. I could see the outline. It had white lights that were going on and off, and it had one solid red light on top.
So how close was it, would you say, May? How close was it?
I would say it was about 2 or 3 stories above our head, which is not that far away. And I always said that if Reggie Jackson at the time, who was a great baseball player, could hit a home run, he could probably hit this thing.
Right, okay. So it's pretty close.
It was pretty close, and you could see it. There was no noise out of this thing.
No, that's a strange thing, isn't it?
We could see the street below us.
And what sort of shape was it? What shape was it, May?
It was a round shape. In this case, it was round. And on the bottom, you could see it was, like when you look at a car, if it's too hot, the heat wave, it's just blurry.
Yeah.
On the road when you're driving and it's very hot.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. You can see this underneath the ship.
So sort of like a shimmery kind of effect, some sort of...
A shimmery thing, right.
Yeah.
Like as if this was a hot you can see it all just just shaking, a little wavy thing.
Well, that's
and I'm looking at it, going, "Oh my God."
yeah, that's a classic sort of UFO description. I mean, how long was the craft there for?
Well, it was so weird because it took its time coming down, and it went sideways at one point. And I just looked at it going, it just went sideways. And I'm staring at it. I'm looking through with binoculars and I had my camera that had surveillance film in it. And I said, let me see if I could take anything. And later on, when it was developed, it looked like my whole film had just been overexposed.
Do you know if there was any calls from anyone to authorities that night of other strange objects?
Apparently we had some people. We had someone call up, and they called like the local police station and the Daily News, not the New York Times, but the Daily News. And a couple of people had said they had spotted something strange. One of them had said that they had gotten a strange call around in the 80s. We lived in the 50s in numbers, if you know Manhattan.
Sure.
We lived in the 50s, and in the 80s along the East River. And I said, well, then that makes sense because we lived in the 50s along the East River. So it was traveling down by the river. And if you looked in the distance when when it was climbing up towards the sky and it was slowly moving upwards, I looked at it in the distance, I said, you know what? Nobody would know the difference. Because you could see a helicopter, you would think it's another ship. Another, not a ship, but a helicopter, a plane.
I see.
You wouldn't think of it as anything out of the ordinary.
Well, that would explain why maybe other helicopters in the vicinity never came to sort of survey it, if you know what I'm...
Right.
Yeah.
It just would never... Because I watched it travel down. I saw it hover over this one building on 23rd on the East River. And I remembered the ship going... It sped up a little, then it slowed down. I watched it in various speeds. And I stood at the balcony watching it for the longest time. And then finally I saw it moving, and I said, oh, God, it's going towards Brooklyn. And we were trying to call some friends. It's coming over towards you. It's going to go over Brooklyn or something. And then all of a sudden I see it went straight up.
So what did the experience do for you and John? I mean, how did it change John? Did it change yourself?
I think I always believed there were other life, somewhere else. And I always believed that there were probably UFOs out there. I mean, I can't think that we could be the only beings in this universe.
Sure.
I mean, that to me would be silly. Excuse me. I think it just reaffirmed, and I think that John felt the same way. It just reaffirmed our beliefs that there are other beings out there.
So you were both
watching.
Sure. So you were both very excited, and did you call your friends to tell them what had happened?
Oh my God, yes! And I think one of them said, "Did May see it? Can you put her on the phone?"
Just to make sure.
I'm always the person who's stable. I didn't drink. I didn't take drugs. I think my worst vice in those days was just drinking Coca-Cola constantly. I'm surprised that I still have a stomach left after all that.
The classic Coke, eh?
But I was like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
I was a big, well, they call it classic, but that old formula. And I used to have bottles, and anybody who came to our home, whether it be in Los Angeles or New York, the bottom part of the shelves are lined with, in those days, there were no cans, they were bottles.
That's right, that's
they
right.
were just bottles of Coke.
And there were no drugs involved, no?
None.
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 So...
Because, I didn't take any. I didn't, that's not something I
No.
did. And it was just, so it was quite interesting to see this.
Yeah.
And, two people screaming. I mean, we're in our commando outfits there. And why would I even say that, if I thought that I had, if there was something else involved,
Well,
I just remember it was Friday, and I remember it because in New York City, where we live, and I kept saying, why isn't anybody home? And then I realized, we're talking summer, Friday night, in this area, everybody's out to the Hamptons.
Of course they are. Of course they are. And, well, it must have been an experience just meant for you and John.
Must have been. And I learned to always look up in the sky, because you just never know.
No, that's right.
what else. And I actually did see one other time.
And this was with John or another friend, or?
No, without John.
Without John.
And I learned to because you look up in the sky, you just don't know what you're seeing because they blend so well.
That's right. That's right. They do indeed.
You know, I'm just happy I got a chance to see one, and to see it with John the first time was the most amazing.
I just sort of turned round, and there was this thing about 100 foot away.
John Lennon saw it, and so did his girlfriend, May Pang.
And I'm screaming, "It's a UFO!"
But only now, 23 years later, are people taking the first close look at this long-lost episode, a day in the life of a Beatle. And for the first time, May Pang is revealing the long, hidden sketches made by John Lennon of what he saw. And stranger still, some are even taking a closer look at John Lennon's death, and the possibility that it was linked to something he wasn't supposed to see or talk about.
It must be a flying saucer, but you don't want to face it, you know?
John Lennon's apparent close encounter came at a time after he'd left the Beatles. He was living in New York City, fighting a U.S. government attempt to deport him. He was under surveillance by the FBI because of his left-wing political activities. And he was separated from his wife, Yoko Ono, living with his one-time assistant, May Pang, in a penthouse on East 52nd Street.
We were finishing up the Walls and Bridges album that John had been working on. And he decided to take a walk out on our terrace. And now, mind you, he is nude.
But if John Lennon made quite a sight, it was nothing compared to what May Pang says they were both about to see for themselves.
And all of a sudden I hear him yelling out to me going, "May, come out here." So I go running out to the terrace. And I go, "What is it? I mean, what?" And I stopped. And I looked up and I saw this saucer-like thing over our head, just going over us very, very slowly, like a snail. And as it was flying over us, it just sort of wavered. It just tilted, went on sort of on its side a little. And I'm screaming, "It's a UFO!" And there was no noise coming out of it. That's what was amazing. And it just hovered over this building for a good 5 minutes. It turned around and it moved out, and it just went straight up into the sky. We just watched it go straight up.
John Lennon didn't keep the sighting to himself. He called the police, and they told him they'd already gotten 3 calls. He called a newspaper. They'd gotten 6. Within days, John Lennon was also on the phone to a radio station, where he spoke to all who were tuned in.
I just sort of turned round, and there was this thing about 100 foot away, and very low, below the height of the buildings, you know? And I was thinking, what is it? I think, it's a flying saucer. It must be a flying saucer. You know? But you don't want to face it, you know? Even if you're a freak like me, you still want to think, oh, it's a balloon or something, you know?
But it was only recently that a radio show producer in another city got hold of the tape and decided to explore its implications.
The John Lennon story is so convincing. 71% of Americans do not believe that the government is telling them the truth about UFOs.
Dr. Bob Hieronymus produces a program called 21st Century Radio in Baltimore that specializes in the paranormal.
John Lennon represented to most of us an individual that we could trust, who would tell the truth, and if he saw these things, then we thought they were credible.
In the years since the sighting, John Lennon's testimony has been available to the public. There's the photograph, where he documented the place where he saw the craft. There's even this message he had printed on the cover of the Walls and Bridges album he was making at the time of the sighting. Perhaps the first million-selling affidavit. But there's something else that's been tucked away for more than 2 decades, literally kept in a vault.
This is an envelope that I saved over the years, since 1974, which is a picture that John actually drew, and it's his version, it's his drawing of what this saucer looked like. So here is the white lights all around, and here was the bright red steady light on top.
And here's where the story takes a twist into the unknown. It was shortly after the sighting and completion of the Walls and Bridges album that John Lennon reunited with Yoko Ono and retired from the music business and public life for 5 years. Shortly after he reemerged with a new album and a new vision, he was murdered. Jonathan Vankin co-wrote a book called The 60 Greatest Conspiracies of All Time. The Lennon murder was one of them.
They were worried that he had too much influence. This is the theory, that he had too much influence over the minds of young people especially.
In his book, Jonathan Vankin did not tie the UFO sighting to Lennon's assassination. But in this age of movies like Men in Black and conspiracy theory, it doesn't take too much of an imagination to wonder if the UFO sighting was somehow connected.
If you happen to be running a CIA propaganda operation or a Men in Black propaganda operation, John Lennon's your guy.
In hindsight, May Pang has but one regret, that her former lover, John Lennon, was not granted his fondest wish, to be beamed up by the UFO and taken away. Maybe then, he'd still be alive, in some other time, in some other place.
I just remember having a conversation shortly thereafter. John's looking at it and he's saying, he goes, I wish they had taken me. He would like to have gone.
We didn't also know, he was a doodler. Like, this is some of his work here. It looks like a UFO.
Well, there's a famous story. We saw a UFO one night, and it was really him that first saw it on our balcony. And he said, oh, what's all those bright lights? Oh, it must be the billboards out here. And he said, wait a minute, we live in a residential area. So he turned around, he sees this thing, and he realized that if he doesn't call me out, I'll say he's crazy.
Right.
So I get called out, and there are two of us standing nude on dark, 9:30 at night, looking at this thing with no noise, nothing. So he took the first thing, which was obviously a manila envelope, and drew it just so he wouldn't forget what it looked like. And it was a bright red light with white light going around. It's metal, that metal, you know, hot look.